Welcome back. Tonight we're leaving the comfort of civilization and venturing into America's last frontier, Alaska. A place where the sun disappears for months, where temperatures can kill you in minutes, and where some of the most terrifying folklore in North America was born. Alaska is a land of extremes. It's bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined, yet has a population smaller than San Francisco. Out there, in those millions of acres of wilderness, darkness, and ice, things happen that defy explanation. Things that make locals lock their doors, avoid certain places, and whisper warnings to newcomers who don't understand the rules. Tonight, I'm sharing 4 true stories from Alaska, accounts that will make you understand why natives have survived there for thousands of years by respecting not just the land, but what lurks within it. These aren't campfire tales, these are documented incidents, verified folklore, and mysteries that remain unsolved to this day. So bundle up, lock your doors, and remember, in Alaska, you're never as alone as you think you are. In southeast Alaska, between Juneau and Petersburg, there's a place the Tlingit people have warned about for centuries. They call it Bay of Death. White settlers renamed it Thomas Bay, but the original name carries more truth. In 1996, a geologist named Marcus Chen was sent to Thomas Bay to survey mineral deposits. Marcus was experienced 10 years of fieldwork across Alaska, comfortable in the wilderness. He'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone who works in Southeast Alaska hears about the Kushtaka eventually. Shape-shifting creatures from Tlingit legend that appear as otters or humans, luring people to their deaths. Marcus dismissed them as folklore. He set up camp near the Patterson Glacier, planning a week-long survey. The first 3 days were routine, taking samples, mapping formations, recording data. But on the 4th morning, something changed. Marcus woke to find otter tracks circling his tent, dozens of them overlapping in perfect circles, strange, but not impossible. Then he noticed his equipment had been moved. His GPS was pointing north when he'd left it facing east. His sample containers were rearranged. Small things, but Marcus was meticulous about his gear. That evening, while cooking dinner, he heard someone calling his name from the forest. The voice was familiar. It sounded like David, his research partner from Anchorage. But David was 800 miles away. Marcus called out, asking who was there. The voice came again, closer now, still calling his name in David's exact tone. Marcus grabbed his satellite phone and called David. He answered on the 3rd ring, clearly at home, kids arguing in the background. As they talked, the voice outside continued calling, now from multiple directions. David's voice, but David was on the phone. Marcus ended the call and retreated to his tent. The voices continued all night, sometimes sounding like David, sometimes like his ex-wife, sometimes like his deceased father, always calling him to come outside, to come help them. They were lost, they were hurt, please come. By morning, the voices had stopped, but the otter tracks were back, this time leading from his tent toward the glacier. Against every instinct, Marcus decided to follow them. He needed to know. The tracks led to an ice cave he'd passed dozens of times, but now, scattered around the entrance, were items that shouldn't exist. A wedding ring identical to his grandmother's, which was buried with her in Taiwan, a Chicago Cubs baseball cap like his father wore, blood-stained and torn. A geological hammer with M. Chen engraved on it, except Marcus's hammer was in his belt. Inside the cave, the walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, spanning decades. Marcus recognized some faces, missing hikers, lost fishermen, disappeared tourists. Photos that couldn't exist, taken from angles that made no sense. And in the newest section, Polaroids of Marcus himself, sleeping in his tent, working at his equipment, dated 3 days in the future. Marcus ran. He abandoned his equipment, his samples, everything except his satellite phone. He hiked through the night to reach the float plane pickup point, calling for early extraction. The pilot found him hypothermic, babbling about otters and photographs. The company sent another team to retrieve his equipment 2 weeks later. They found his campsite destroyed, tent shredded, equipment scattered. But the ice cave Marcus described, they found only solid rock where he swore the entrance had been. Marcus never returned to Alaska. He works in Nevada now, surveying nice, dry, empty deserts. But sometimes, usually on quiet nights, he still hears voices calling his name. They sound like people he knows. They're always asking him to come back. The Tlingit elders weren't surprised by his story. They've been warning people about the Kushtaka for generations. Shapeshifters that steal souls, that mimic human voices, that lure the unprepared to their doom. Most outsiders dismiss it as legend, but those who've encountered them, like Marcus, know better. In Thomas Bay, the Bay of Death, some legends are very, very real. Between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik lies an area that swallowed more planes and people per capita than anywhere else on Earth. They call it the Alaska Triangle, and since 1988, over 0 people have vanished within its boundaries. That's 4 people per every 1,000 who live there, a disappearance rate that defies explanation. But one case stands out above all others, not because of who disappeared, but because of what happened to the one who came back. On October 16, 2012, Arctic Air Flight 708 took off from Anchorage, carrying 6 passengers to a remote mining operation near the Brooks Range. The pilot, Rebecca Martinez, had 15 years of experience flying in Alaska. Her co-pilot, James Kovac, had 12. The passengers were all mining engineers heading out for a routine 2-week rotation. Weather was clear, equipment was functioning perfectly. They filed their flight plan and took off at 9:47 a.m. At 11:15 a.m., Rebecca radioed Fairbanks Control. Her voice was calm but confused. "Fairbanks, this is Arctic 708. We're experiencing navigation anomalies. All instruments showing different readings. GPS has us 200 miles off course, but visual landmarks say we're on track. Please advise." Fairbanks tried to get a radar lock, but Arctic 708 wasn't showing up. They could hear Rebecca on radio, but couldn't see the plane. For 30 minutes, they tried to guide her using terrain descriptions. Then, at 11:47 a.m., Rebecca's voice changed. "Fairbanks, there's something wrong with the passengers. They're not moving, not responding. James isn't." James isn't. Static. Search and rescue launched immediately. For 3 days, they scoured the flight path. Nothing. No wreckage, no emergency beacon, no sign of Arctic 708. On day 4, hikers near Denali, the 300 miles from the flight path, reported an abandoned plane in a valley that had been empty the day before. It was Arctic 708. The plane was intact but covered in a thick layer of ice, despite temperatures being above freezing. Inside, they found 5 bodies. The mining engineers were in their seats, frozen solid, ice crystals growing from inside their mouths and eyes. James Kovac was in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, body temperature measured at -40 degrees Celsius. In an heated cabin, Rebecca Martinez was gone. The black box revealed 2 hours of normal flight, then static, then nothing. The plane's clock showed it had been in the air for 9 hours, but it had only been missing for 4 days. The fuel tanks, which should have been empty after 9 hours, were full. 3 weeks later, Rebecca Martinez walked into a truck stop in Coldfoot, Alaska, 400 miles from where the plane was found. She was wearing her pilot's uniform, clean and pressed. No signs of exposure, no frostbite. She asked to use the phone to call her husband. When state troopers arrived, Rebecca was calm, coherent, but couldn't explain what happened. Her last memory was the navigation malfunction. Then she was walking along the Dalton Highway. The 5 days in between were gone. Medical examination revealed anomalies. Her body temperature was 3 degrees below normal, but she showed no signs of hypothermia. Her blood contained ice crystals that should have killed her, but she was fine. Brain scans showed unusual activity in regions associated with memory and time perception. Under hypnosis, Rebecca recalled fragments. Flying through clouds that weren't there, passengers standing up, walking through the cabin like they were underwater. James turning to her, ice forming on his face, saying, "We're not flying anymore, we're falling upward." A voice on the radio speaking in a language that sounded like wind through trees. The FAA investigation concluded spatial disorientation leading to controlled flight into terrain, despite the plane being found intact. They couldn't explain the ice, the missing time, or how Rebecca survived. The case was closed. Rebecca never flew again. She moved to Arizona, as far from Alaska as she could get, but she still wakes up sometimes with ice in her lungs, coughing up crystals that melt before anyone else can see them. The Alaska Triangle has claimed thousands of aircraft since the 1940s. Most are never found. Arctic 708 was lucky, they got 5 bodies back. But sometimes, in Alaska, being found doesn't mean being saved. And Rebecca Martinez knows something she won't tell anyone. In her final interview with investigators, she was asked why she thought she survived when the others didn't. She looked at them for a long moment, then said, "What makes you think I did?" Everyone knows the heroic story of the 1,925 Nome Serum Run, brave mushers and dogs racing against time to deliver diphtheria antitoxin to save the children of Nome. Balto became famous, statues were erected, movies were made. But there's another story from that winter that Nome old-timers only whisper about. A story the newspapers didn't print, that the territorial government buried, that only survives in letters and diaries locked away in archives. Dr. Samuel Carter was Nome's second physician in 1925, working alongside Dr. Curtis Welch during the diphtheria outbreak. While Welch managed the crisis, Carter was assigned to handle the town's other medical needs. On January 2020, 3 days after the serum run began, Carter was called to examine something unusual. A gold prospector named William Tennant had been found at his claim 12 miles outside Nome. The man who found him, Jacob Morse, was shaking when he reached Carter's office. "Doc, you need to come quick. Something's wrong with Bill, real wrong." Carter found Tennant alive but changed. His body temperature was 74 degrees Fahrenheit, but should have been dead, but he was conscious. His eyes had turned white, not blind, but white like fresh snow. And his skin, Carter's journal describes it as crystalline, as if frost had grown beneath the surface. Tennant could speak, but only in whispers. He told Carter he'd found something in the permafrost while digging. A chamber, perfectly round, walls smooth as glass. Inside were bodies, not human but humanoid, preserved perfectly in ice that wasn't quite ice. "They were sleeping," Tennant whispered, "but when I touched the wall, one opened its eyes, white eyes, like mine now. It spoke without moving its mouth. Said they'd been waiting, said the cold was coming back." Carter brought Tennant to Nome's small hospital. Within hours, 3 more prospectors arrived with identical symptoms: white eyes, crystalline skin, body temperatures that should mean death. All had been working claims in the same area, all described finding chambers in the permafrost. By January 25, as the serum mushers fought through blizzards, Carter had 17 patients with what he called permafrost syndrome. The territorial government was notified. The response was swift and absolute. Quarantine the affected, seal the claims, tell no one. But it was too late. On January 28th, the first Nome resident, a child named Mary Aknavuk, developed symptoms without ever leaving town. Then her mother, then their neighbors. Whatever Tennant had found, it was spreading. Carter's journal becomes frantic. The affected don't die, they change. Temperature drops daily. Speech becomes whispers, then silence. They stand at windows, staring north, swaying slightly as if hearing music. When restrained, they don't struggle, they simply wait. On February 20, as the serum finally arrived to save Nome's children from diphtheria, Carter made a desperate decision. The hospital's basement held 43 affected patients. He sealed the doors and flooded the basement with coal furnace exhaust, attempting to raise their body temperatures by force. The screaming lasted 6 hours. Not pain. Carter described it as harmonious, like a choir. When they finally opened the basement, they found the patients unchanged, still alive, now covered in a thin layer of what looked like frost but felt like glass. The government response team arrived February 5, not doctors, military. They removed all affected patients in covered trucks. The official report states they were taken to Anchorage for treatment. No records exist of their arrival. The claims where the chambers were found were dynamited, then sealed with concrete. The prospectors' discoveries were classified. Families were told their loved ones died of diphtheria. Dr. Carter was transferred to Seattle with a full pension and a lifetime confidentiality agreement. His journal was supposed to be destroyed, but Carter hid a copy, found after his death in 1967. His final entry, dated February 10, 1925. The serum run saved Nome's children from diphtheria, but what Tennant woke in the permafrost is patient. It spreads not through air or touch, but through knowledge. To know of it is to invite it in. The white eyes see farther than ours. They're waiting for something. God help us when it arrives. In 2019, melting permafrost near Nome exposed a perfectly round chamber, walls smooth as glass. It was immediately resealed by federal authorities. The site is now restricted, monitored by cameras that frequently malfunction, showing only static that looks almost like falling snow. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, Nome residents report seeing figures standing in the tundra, perfectly still, swaying slightly. They have white eyes. They're still waiting. On the southern edge of the Kenai Peninsula sits one of Alaska's most disturbing mysteries, an entire town abandoned because something in the woods wouldn't let them stay. Portlock, once a thriving cannery town, now stands empty, its buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The official reason for abandonment in 1950 was economic factors. The truth is much darker. Portlock was established in the early 1900s as Port Chatham, renamed after Captain Nathaniel Portlock. By the 1930s, it had a cannery, chrome mine, school, and post office. Nearly 200 people called it home. Then, the deaths began. The first was Andrew Kamuck in 1931, a logger found torn apart near the town. Not by bears, the wounds were wrong. Local Sugpiaq elders warned of Nantianak, big hairy creature that lived in the mountains. Whites dismissed it as superstition. By 1939, the death toll had risen. Miners vanished. Fishermen's boats were found empty. Massive handprints pressed into the metal hulls. Footprints 3 feet long appeared around homes. Children reported the big man watching from the forest. Tom Larson, the town's postmaster, kept detailed records. His journals, discovered in 1973, paint a terrifying picture. October 15, 1942. Another miner gone. Jake Brass didn't show for shift. Found his cabin door ripped off hinges. Not broken, pulled clean off. Blood trail leads to woods. Sheriff won't investigate anymore. November 3, 1942. Mary Peterson says it stood outside her window last night. 8 feet tall, covered in hair, eyes like lanterns. Her husband fired shotgun through glass. It laughed. Found the buckshot in morning, flattened like it hit steel. December 20, 1942. 3 families left this week. Won't say why. Johnson girl finally talked, says she was grabbed near school. It carried her into woods, set her down gentle, pointed back to town. Told her in words that weren't words that we need to leave. All of us. The territorial government sent investigators in 1943. Their report, declassified in 1999, confirms multiple deaths, disappearances, and evidence of an unidentified predator of unusual size and strength. Recommendations included increased law enforcement and population relocation if situation escalates. It escalated. In 1947, a cannery worker named Albert Petker was attacked near the docks. He survived but was paralyzed with fear. When he finally spoke, he described being grabbed by something that smelled like death and wet dog, lifted off the ground and carried into the forest. The creature stopped at a clearing filled with bones, human bones arranged in patterns. It set him down, gestured at the bones, then at the town, then made a sound he described as screaming wind. Then it left him there. By 1949, Portlock was dying. The cannery couldn't keep workers. The mine shut down after an entire crew refused to enter. Families left in groups, abandoning homes and possessions. The school closed when only 3 children remained. The final straw came in early 1950. A group of hunters from Anchorage, dismissing the stories as native nonsense, came to prove the town was safe. 5 men entered the woods above Portlock. 1 came back. Evan Morris was found 3 days later on the beach, clothes shredded, mind broken. He repeated one phrase over and over, "It showed me what comes next." When finally sedated and questioned, he said the creature hadn't killed the others, it had taken them to show them something. A cave filled with paintings, older than any known civilization. Images of creatures like it, walking among humans. Then images of empty towns, forests reclaiming buildings, humans gone. "It's not killing us," Morris said. "It's warning us. We're in its home. We've always been in its home, and its patience is running out." By summer 1950, Portlock was empty. The last resident, an elderly Sugpiaq woman named Melania, left a note nailed to the dock. "Nantianak keeps the old agreement. We broke it. Now we pay." The town remains abandoned. In 1990, a developer tried to rebuild. Workers reported equipment destroyed, trailers flipped, tools bent into impossible shapes. After finding enormous footprints circling their camp and hearing sounds they described as industrial machinery mixed with animal roars, they left. In 2009, a reality TV crew attempted to film in Portlock. Their footage, never aired, allegedly shows something massive moving between buildings. The crew left after one night. The producer later stated, "Some things shouldn't be on television." Today, Portlock's buildings rot in the rain. Boats avoid the harbour. Bush pilots report seeing movement in the ruins, shapes too large to be human. The forest is reclaiming the town, slowly erasing humanity's footprint. But sometimes, hunters in the area find signs, footprints that dwarf a grown man's boot, trees bent and twisted into warnings. And occasionally, in the mist that rolls off the bay, the sound of something vast, breathing in the ruins of Portlock. The Sugpiaq elders still remember the old stories, how their ancestors made an agreement with Nantianak, certain places for humans, certain places for the old ones. Portlock broke that agreement. And in Alaska, the old agreements still matter. The old ones are still watching, still waiting, still warning us which places we should never have tried to claim.